You're sprinting through the Australian night, terrified, unable to look over your shoulder because the moment you do, you're finished. Behind you is a giant lizard driven by an insatiable hunger. Relax, it's only a nightmare. But for the people of that era, it was terrifyingly real. Let's start from the beginning. In 1859, in a quarry in eastern Australia, workers cutting through ancient sediment broke loose a single fossilized vertebra. It was a strange thing to hold, heavy, weathered, and far too large to belong to any animal anyone recognized, roughly the size of a man's fist and clearly part of a spine. It traveled, as remarkable fossils did in those days, to one of the great anatomists of the age, the Englishman Richard Owen, the man who had already invented the word dinosaur and who in that same era would give the marsupial lion its name. Owen studied the bone, recognized it as belonging to a reptile, a lizard of monstrous proportions, and named the creature it came from Megalania, a name meant to evoke a great and ancient roamer. And then science settled in to argue, because over the next century and a half, almost every confident claim made about this animal, how large it was, what it was related to, how it killed, even whether it is truly gone, would be challenged, revised, or quietly overturned. This is not the story of a monster. It is the story of how wrong we have been, again and again, about the largest lizard that ever walked the earth, and of how much we are still not sure of even now. Let's place it first. The animal lived in Australia from at least 1.5 million years ago until somewhere around 40 to 50,000 years ago, which means, as with the marsupial lion and the giant wombat we have met before on this channel, that its disappearance lines up unnervingly well with the arrival of the first humans on the continent. Hold on to that, because it becomes the heart of the whole story by the end. Its fossils have turned up across the continent, concentrated in Queensland and New South Wales, and for well over a century it carried the name Owen gave it, Megalania prisca, the ancient giant. Today, most scientists classify it within the genus that contains all the living monitor lizards, under the name Varanus priscus, the ancient monitor. But the old name has stuck in the public imagination, and it is easy to see why. Megalania simply sounds like what people want it to be, a monster. It is one of the only large animals from the Australian Ice Age whose popular reputation has grown larger over time rather than smaller. Inflated by documentaries and internet, lists into something closer to a film creature than a real reptile. The trouble is that almost everything the public believes about that monster comes from the earliest, shakiest guesses, and the science has been quietly walking those guesses back for decades. So let's go through the 5 things we got wrong, one at a time, because each correction is more interesting than the last. The first thing we got wrong is the most basic of all. How big was it? Ask the internet, and you will be told confidently that Megalania was a 7-meter, 2-ton super predator, a reptile the length of a bus that could have swallowed a person whole. It is a thrilling number. It is also almost certainly too big. The problem goes all the way back to the fossils themselves, because we have never found a complete Megalania skeleton. Not one. Everything we think we know about its size has been reconstructed from scattered, fragmentary bones, a vertebra here, a limb bone there, and the earliest attempts to scale the whole up from those fragments, made in the 1970s and 80s, produced those famous, enormous figures. The reasoning was enough. Take a vertebra, compare it to the same bone in a living monitor lizard, work out the ratio, and multiply the rest of the body to match. But that method hides a trap. Body proportions do not always scale up cleanly. A giant animal is rarely just a small one enlarged, its bones thicken and its shape shifts as it grows, and a single unusually large vertebra can throw an entire estimate wildly off. Scaling an entire animal from a handful of bones is a treacherous business, and as more material was found and the methods grew more careful, the numbers came down. The work of the paleontologist Ralph Molnar, who literally wrote the book on this animal, and later analyses by researchers including Scott Hocknell and his colleagues around 2009, converged on something more modest and more defensible. A typical Megalania was probably somewhere in the range of 4.5 to 5.5 meters long, and weighed in the hundreds of kilograms rather than thousands, perhaps 300 to 500 for an average adult. Even at those more modest dimensions, this was still an utterly formidable creature, a land lizard the length of a large saltwater crocodile and heavier than any reptile walking on land anywhere today. The very largest individuals may have pushed beyond that, and the truly giant estimates cannot be entirely ruled out, but they rest on the thinnest of evidence. And here is the part that is easy to miss, the part that makes this a better story than the myth. The most honest thing we can say about the size of the largest lizard that ever lived is that we have been arguing about it for 150 years and we still do not know for certain. That uncertainty is not a failure. It is the most truthful and the most fascinating fact in the whole account, because it tells you exactly how thin the line is between science and legend when all you have to work with is broken bone. The second thing we got wrong is what it actually was. The popular shorten is that Megalania was a giant Komodo dragon, and that is close enough to be useful and wrong enough to matter. It is true that Megalania belongs to Varanus, the same genus as the Komodo dragon, which makes them genuine relatives. But it was not simply a Komodo dragon scaled up. When you look at where Megalania actually sits on the family tree, it groups not with the Komodo dragon of Indonesia, but with Australia's own monitor lizards, and its closest living relative appears to be an animal that is still very much alive today. The parente, Varanus giganteus, the largest monitor lizard in Australia and one of the largest in the world, a desert predator that can reach around 2.5 meters and that you can watch right now moving across the red sand of the outback. The parente is itself a formidable animal, a fast, intelligent, powerful hunter that takes prey as large as small kangaroos and rears up on its hind legs to fight when cornered. It is the kind of lizard that the first time you see one in the wild, quietly rearranges your sense of what Australia is. And it is, in evolutionary terms, the small surviving echo of something far larger. And this changes the entire mental image. Megalania was not a foreign monster, it was a local one. It was in the most accurate terms we can manage. A parente scaled up to the size of a saltwater crocodile, a familiar Australian animal grown to impossible proportions. That is the kind of fact that this channel exists for, because it means you do not have to imagine the creature from nothing. You can look at its living cousin, sunning itself on a rock in Central Australia, and then simply terrifyingly multiply. The third thing we got wrong is how its bite worked, and this correction is one of the most recent and least known of all. For most of the 20th century, the assumption about large monitor lizards, including the Komodo dragon, was that they were not venomous. Their bites were dangerous, everyone agreed, but the danger was thought to come from bacteria, from a mouth so filthy with the rotting remains of old meals that a single bite would infect a victim with a lethal cocktail of microbes, after which the lizard would simply follow the dying animal until the infection brought it down. It was a vivid story, and it was wrong. In 2009, a team led by the venom researcher Bryan Fry, then at the University of Melbourne, published a study that overturned it completely. Using detailed imaging and analysis, they showed that the Komodo dragon possesses genuine venom glands in its lower jaw, glands that deliver toxins which lower a victim's blood pressure, prevent its blood from clotting, and accelerate blood loss, sending the prey into shock. The bacteria story, it turned out, was never necessary to explain how these animals killed. The venom did the work all along, and the supposedly filthy infectious bite was largely a misreading of an animal that had a far more sophisticated weapon hidden in its jaw. The dragon was a venomous animal all along, and the discovery rewrote our understanding of an entire branch of the reptile family tree. And the implication for Megalania is as clear as it is chilling. If the Komodo dragon is venomous and the parente, Megalania's closest living relative, also has venom glands, then the most reasonable conclusion by far is that Megalania was venomous too. We cannot prove it directly, because venom glands are soft tissue and soft tissue does not fossilize. So this remains an inference rather than a certainty. But it is a strong one, and it transforms the animal. Picture not merely a lizard the size of a crocodile with bone-crushing jaws, but one whose bite also flooded its prey with toxins, so that even an animal that broke free and fled was already losing, its blood thinning, its pressure dropping, its strength draining away with every step, while the lizard followed, unhurried, certain, waiting for the inevitable. Which leads directly to the fourth correction, the question of how it hunted, because the old image gets that wrong too. It is tempting to imagine an apex predator of this size as a pursuer, a reptilian wolf running down its prey across the plains. But everything we know about large monitor lizards, and everything the venom inference implies, points to something very different and far more patient. Megalania was almost certainly an ambush hunter. Like its living relatives, it likely relied not on speed but on stillness, lying in wait, choosing its moment and delivering one devastating venom-laden bite, after which it did not need to win a chase at all, it only needed to wait. The prey would weaken on its own, over minutes or hours or even days. And the lizard, with its slow reptilian metabolism, could afford to follow at a fraction of the energy cost a mammal would burn. It is a method that sounds almost lazy until you realize how merciless it is. A hunter that does not need to outrun anything, because it has already won the moment its teeth break the skin. And the prey it followed was the largest the continent had to offer. Megalania shared its world with the megafauna we have already explored on this channel, the giant short-faced kangaroos, the flightless birds heavier than a person, and the rhino-sized giant wombat, Diprotodon. It was very likely one of the only predators in all of Australia capable of bringing down a full-grown Diprotodon, and that fact creates one of the most striking pictures in the entire story of this lost world. Because it means Pleistocene Australia did not have one apex predator, it had two, side by side, built on completely different blueprints. There was the marsupial lion, Thylacoleo, the cat-like ambusher that dropped on its prey from the trees and killed with a single shearing bite. And there was Megalania, the patient reptile that bit once and let chemistry finish the work. A mammal and a reptile, each the size to take down a giant, sharing the same continent and very likely the same prey. They could hardly have been more different. One was warm-blooded, fast, and built to kill in a single explosive moment. The other was cold-blooded, patient, and built to kill slowly, by attrition. One climbed and pounced, the other waited and poisoned. Did they compete directly? Did they avoid one another? Did the warm-blooded hunter and the cold-blooded one divide the land between them somehow? The honest answer is that we do not know. The fossil record does not preserve that kind of detail. But the image of those two utterly different kings ruling the same lost continent at the same time is one of the most haunting things paleontology has to offer. And then there is the fifth correction, the strangest of all, the one that pulls this story out of the deep past and drags it, uneasily, into the present. We say Megalania is extinct, and by every scientific standard it is. But it is also one of the very few extinct animals about which people still report sightings. For more than a century, there have been scattered accounts from the Australian outback of enormous lizards, far larger than any living monitor, glimpsed crossing remote roads or vanishing into scrub. The Australian interior is enormous, sparsely populated, and poorly surveyed, exactly the kind of landscape where a legend can survive. And the idea of a surviving giant lizard has become a small but persistent strand of the continent's folklore. This is territory that slides quickly and dangerously into pseudoscience, and most of these reports deserve exactly the skepticism they receive. But not all of them are easy to dismiss out of hand. The most famous came in 1979 from a naturalist named Frank Gordon, who reported seeing an enormous lizard far bigger than any known living species moving through the Watagan Mountains of New South Wales. And here is the detail that keeps the question from being entirely closed. Ralph Molnar, the paleontologist who is the genuine world authority on this animal, the serious scientist who spent his career studying its bones, did not slam the door completely. In his writing, he acknowledged that the survival of small relic populations could not be absolutely ruled out. Even as he made clear he considered it highly unlikely. That is a very particular and very honest scientific position, and it is the only responsible way to handle this. The reports are almost certainly misidentifications, exaggerations, or the ordinary tricks memory plays in a vast and empty landscape. The rational conclusion is that Megalania has been gone for tens of thousands of years. But science, when it is being careful, rarely deals in absolute certainties, and the man who knew this animal best was unwilling to say never. So we will not say it either. We will simply leave the question where he left it, almost certainly closed, but not quite locked. Which brings us, finally, to the pattern, and the pattern is the whole point. Step back from Megalania and look at the company it kept. The marsupial lion, Thylacoleo, gone. The giant wombat, Diprotodon, gone. And Megalania, the largest land lizard the world has ever known, gone as well. 3 apex giants? 3 completely different kinds of animal, a marsupial, a herbivore, and a reptile, all vanishing from the same continent inside the same narrow window of time, roughly 40 to 50,000 years ago. And in every case, that window overlaps with the arrival of the first human beings in Australia. For thousands of years, the people who first walked into this continent shared it with a 5-meter venomous lizard, with a marsupial that could crush bone, with herds of 3-ton wombats. They saw these animals. They lived alongside them. There are stories woven through various Aboriginal traditions of enormous reptilian creatures, and while we must be careful and respectful and not overstate what such stories can prove, some researchers have wondered aloud whether a thread of genuine memory of real encounters with animals like Megalania might be preserved in them, carried down across a span of time longer than all of written history. If that were ever shown to be true, it would be one of the longest unbroken threads of memory anywhere in human culture. A story passed from mouth to mouth across more than 1,000 generations, older than agriculture, older than the wheel. We cannot know, and we should be honest that we may never know. But the possibility alone is staggering. What we can say is that an entire world of giants, assembled over millions of years, emptied out almost at once, and that our own species was present for the ending. So the next time we joke that everything in Australia is trying to kill you, remember this video. Because Australia, strange and wonderful as it still is a quieter, smaller, and emptier place than the one the first humans encountered. The giants are gone, and they left no descendants. What roams the continent today are the survivors and their diminished counterparts. The parentee where Megalania once ruled, the wombat where Diprotodon once walked. They are small remnants of what was once a land of giants, creatures that evolved, thrived, and dominated their world. Today, all that remains is our imagination, trying to grasp the scale of their former greatness. But here is the twist that this whole series keeps circling back to. The thing that makes Australia stranger than almost anywhere else on Earth. The most dangerous animal on the continent was never the 5-meter lizard. It is not extinct, it is not a giant, and it is not hiding in some remote mountain range waiting to be rediscovered. It is alive right now. It is smaller than your thumbnail, and it very likely lives within a short walk of millions of people, in gardens and sheds, in the corners of suburban backyards. Its venom can kill a healthy adult, and against a small child there has historically been very little time to act. We have spent this entire video staring at the largest predator Australia ever produced. The one you should actually be afraid of is one of the smallest. It is called the funnel web spider, and what it can do is far harder to believe than anything you have just heard.